The impeachment proceedings officially began on December 14th when the National Assembly passed the impeachment motion.
총 득표수 300표 중 가 204표, 부 85표, 기권 3표, 무효 8표로서 가결됐음을 선포합니다.
During the first vote on the impeachment motion a week earlier, the ruling People Power Party opted not to participate at all, preventing the quorum from being met and invalidating the vote. This time, while the party maintained its opposition to the impeachment bill, it allowed members to vote freely, leading to full participation by all lawmakers. As a result, the impeachment motion against the president was passed, marking the third such case in South Korea's constitutional history. Assuming that all 192 opposition lawmakers voted in favor, at least 12 members of the People Power Party must have also supported the motion. Just 11 days after declaring martial law on December 3rd, President Yoon's duties were suspended as he entered the second half of his term. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo has stepped in as acting president, assuming full constitutional and legal powers, including command of the armed forces and emergency authority to oversee state affairs.
국가의 안위와 국민의 일상이 흔들리지 않도록 철저하게 헌법과 법률에 따라 안정된 국정 운영에 만전을 기하겠습니다.
The decision on whether to remove President Yoon from office now lies solely with the Constitutional Court. The two main grounds for the impeachment motion are the alleged illegality of the martial law declaration and accusations of leading an insurrection. The National Assembly, which filed the impeachment motion, argues that the martial law declaration did not meet the legal criteria and that proper procedures were not followed. Furthermore, they claim that deploying the military and police force against constitutional bodies such as National Assembly and the National Election Commission constitutes an act of insurrection. In contrast, President Yoon's team defends the martial law declaration as an unavoidable measure to prevent what they describe as overreach by the opposition. They contend that the accusation of treason lacked merits, asserting that there was no attempt to seize power through rebellion or any actual insurrection.
대통령의 헌법적 결단이자 통치 행위가 어떻게 내란이 될 수 있습니까? 대통령의 비상계엄 선포권 행사는 사명권 행사, 외교권 행사와 같은 사법심사의 대상이 되지 않는 통치 행위입니다.
On December 16, the Constitutional Court formally delivered the impeachment resolution to President Yoon. And on December 18th, the court issued a preparation order requesting the submission of cabinet meeting minutes and martial law proclamation number 1. The Constitutional Court is now fully engaged in deliberations, with all judges convening to review and vote on the case, supported by a task force dedicated to legal analysis for the impeachment trial. Discussions between ruling and opposition parties are underway to fill 3 vacant seats on the 9-member bench through parliamentary confirmation by the end of this year. The Constitutional Court is required to issue its decision on the impeachment within 180 days. At least 6 out of 9 justices must vote in favor for the impeachment to be upheld. If the motion is rejected, President Yoon will immediately resume his duties. If upheld, he will be removed from office, and a presidential election must be held within 60 days. Now we've covered everything from the impeachment trial of President Yoon to the key issues at hand. This time, we'll take a closer look at the remaining procedures with the help of legal experts. We are joined by Dean Hee-eun from the Handong International Law School. Welcome, Professor.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
Yes, thank you. So the impeachment trial was triggered by actually the declaration of martial law, and now it has 180 days. So what kind of processes can take place during this period?
Right, and as you mentioned, as soon as the resolution was met and the case is now going to the Constitutional Court, the court has 180 days to decide, to adjudicate the case. Now, there's a couple of complications here. There are actually two, because first, the issue about, for example, the pending criminal trial potentially could delay the actual impeachment trial itself. So according to the Constitutional Court Act, if there's a pending criminal trial, that criminal trial can take precedence. And so basically what will happen is the Constitutional Court will then stay the proceedings, which means to delay the proceedings until the criminal trial actually is brought forth and charges are confirmed, he's acquitted or convicted. That could take quite some time. But that's up to the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court in this case has discretion whether to stay the proceedings or to continue with the impeachment trial itself. But there's also another question here is whether President Yoon will respond in a timely manner when it comes to documents that the Constitutional Court submits to him. Because as a matter of due process, the court needs to give him notice, and that notice needs to be received by him. And the question is whether or not he will actually physically receive that notice, whether it will be emailed to him, whether he'll get it by personal delivery. The court has done those things so far, but President Yoon has not responded. So there's an issue there about when the proceedings will commence with respect to his notification. But if he does, sometimes irrespective of notification, because the court sometimes has ruled that even if he hasn't personally received it himself, but he's gotten at his residence or he's been emailed that notification, the trial will proceed. And if the trial does in fact proceed, you have now the process laying out where you have a presiding judge who will call a meeting for the justices, and then the justice will then devise a plan to how to proceed with the trial itself. And then once the trial happens, then there will be a summons issued to the president. The president may or may not appear, but that is really of no relevance. He'll be given time, but if he doesn't appear, the trial will proceed with or without him. And then, of course, then you have questioning and you have evidence, and it proceeds like a normal trial. And then once the trial process is completed, the evidence is now submitted, the court will then deliberate. And the justice will then decide whether or not to convict him or not, or acquit. And basically, of course, if he's impeached and the conviction is upheld, he will have to be removed from office and we'll have a new election for the president. But if he's acquitted, then he can return back to his office with the full powers he had before the impeachment.
Okay, the process seems to be quite clear to me right now. But separation of power is very critical to democracy, right? But there are some who are concerned that perhaps political leaning can have an impact on the court's decision in handling all these cases. Do you think that can happen?
I mean, there's always that possibility. But I mean, the way that the Korean Constitutional Court is comprised and how justices are appointed, basically there's supposed to be a distribution among the different political entities, legal bodies, to ensure that there's not this political influence that potentially could upset the court. And so, as you may know, 3 justices will be directly appointed by the president, and then 3 justices will be elected by the National Assembly and then appointed by the president, and then 3 other justices will be elected by the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Korea, and then to be appointed by the president. So the idea is it's supposed to provide sort of an ideological sort of balance.
Right.
If there's some possibility that the justices may have particular leaning because, let's say, the president approved the justice and therefore may be more conservative versus the National Assembly, which is controlled by the Progressive Party, that those justices will be more progressive. So there's always the possibility that their political leanings could influence a a judge. But I think justices generally, of course, will take an oath to basically not let the politics influence their decisions. But human nature being as it is, there could always be that potential problem. But I think at this point, I think generally people do not think that the political leanings will have a direct impact because the whole country is watching the court very carefully. So there's a lot of pressure on the court not to take sides. And if you look at the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye, progressive and conservative justices voted for her impeachment.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of confidence in the court that they will not make a political decision in this case.
All right. And related to that issue, actually, the Constitutional Court has 9 judges, but now it has 6 judges, right? Do you think it'll take time, and how the court will proceed with the 6 judges or 9 judges? How do you foresee the whole process?
This is quite a conundrum for the court because under the Constitutional Court rules themselves, in order to actually make an adjudication and then eventually a decision, you have to have at least 7 justices on the court. And so right now, as you mentioned, that there are only 6. And the acting Chief Justice seemed to suggest, at least publicly in terms of news reports and his comments to the media, that they can proceed with 6 justices. Now, there's precedent for that if, in this case, in the previous situation where, as you know, the Progressive Party of the National Assembly has impeached many of President Yoon's officials, and one of those officials asked the court to just decide the case with 6, and the court allowed it. But in this case, formally the court says, the court rules themselves provide that you should have at least 7. And so if there aren't 7, formally you cannot have an adjudication. If you can't have an adjudication, then of course, in that situation, the process needs to be stopped at some point. This is the big back and forth now, I think, procedurally, is whether in fact you need actual 7 justices. In order for the impeachment to actually be confirmed, you have to have 6 justices vote in favor of it. So if they do proceed with 6 justices, it has to be a unanimous decision, because even if one justice votes against the impeachment and conviction of the impeachment, then President Yoon will go back to his office of president. So this puts the court in a really big, I think, problem, because you need to have at least 7. And of course, given the magnitude of this case, it would certainly be best to have a full bench, and that full bench would include 9 justices. And that's now the big tussle back and forth in the National Assembly, is the 3 justices that will now be elected by the National Assembly. If they do in fact go through with it, then Prime Minister Han, who's now the acting president, will now have to appoint them, and he can choose to appoint them or not to appoint them. So there's a potentially huge constitutional crisis when it comes to this impeachment because of the whole procedure of the Constitutional Court.
Thank you for your insights.
It was a pleasure being here.